us on the map. Mr. Caruana leading the beat. Australia global rank 6. Feeling the heat like immortality.
All right, so I'll probably give you 3 different groups of inequities here, not in too much detail because we're actually going to go into groups in the next series of videos after this one. So inequities, so where are they, what are they, and what can be done about them? So remember, an inequity is basically where there is a gap in healthcare or whatever it is we're looking at. We're looking at healthcare here, or health status, I should say. So why is that? So of the first one that I'm going to address is First Nations people. So they probably have our largest inequity here in Australia. Just like I said, very briefly, overall 2.3 times greater morbidity rate. So remember the top 5 causes of morbidity. So imagine for every one Australian, or non-First Nations Australian, I should say, for every one non-First Nations Australian that has XYZ disease, there are 2.3 times First Nations people that have that same disease, which is crazy, all right? And significantly lower life expectancy. And just checking the data, that is basically 8.8 years for males and 8.1 years for females. And that's a long time, okay? So almost 9 years for a male is the average life expectancy currently less. So why? Why are these inequities around? So we've got overall, when you look at First Nations people, there are lower levels of education and health literacy. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Maybe they need to not be in school and stay home to look after the family because it might be a single parent family and mum or dad are actually out working and no one's at home to look after the kids. So there's one reason. Lower levels of health literacy because of that too. Also, we've got lower levels of income overall. Indirect discrimination, which is something that is trying to be addressed. So we don't really have a lot anymore, touch wood, thankfully, of direct racism anymore towards First Nations peoples. I am an Aboriginal man and I have never experienced direct racism towards myself. But there is indirect discrimination, and that's that thought of like, while you're not directly doing it, you might be excluding people, okay? Or making them feel unwelcome without actually directly saying, you're unwelcome, okay? It happens. And location, so living, a large portion of First Nations people do live rurally and remotely here in Australia, which does limit their access to healthcare and limits their access to job opportunities and limits their access to higher education and stuff like that. So all of these things interplay together, but I will go into it in more detail in the next series of videos. What can be done about these things, okay? So we do have the ACCHO, which is culturally appropriate healthcare, and it is delivered by First Nations people for First Nations people. So this is an encouragement for First Nations people to go and actually seek medical care in a culturally appropriate, safe space without feeling judged by non-First Nations people, okay? You can imagine that, 10, 15 years ago, if an Aboriginal man went to just your regular local doctor, that doctor may have indirectly done some discrimination, like, this is pretty typical of your people. I'm trying to not be directly racist here, but you get the point, all right? And it's not his fault, okay? Obviously we still do have, the whole reconciliation thing. It's hard for older generations you can't just say you're sorry one day and everything's okay. It doesn't work that way, all right? Yes, it was absolutely 100% a good step in the right direction. And as a country, Australia is moving in mostly in the right direction as far as accepting First Nations people, but there are still these inequities, okay? Another thing that the Australian government and employers are doing is trying to address socioeconomic disadvantages, so remember income, education, employment, by incentivising education and employment of First Nations peoples, all right? So there are lots of job roles now that require a First Nations person to be employed in that position. So they'll have they might like apply department manager for XYZ, and they have 2 department managers, and one of those department managers must be a First Nations person, okay? Not all employers do this. Not saying that you have to have one First Nations person, one non-First Nations person. They could both be First Nations people, which would be great. But generally, they will put these things in place to try and encourage First Nations people to seek well-paying jobs. And then if you have more income, hopefully you then use it to further your own education, but the education of your children, and then the cycle gets broken. But it's going to take years and years and years to break that cycle, okay? And the other one is like incentivizing education. So I know that universities do try and encourage First Nations people to study and further their education, so therefore hopefully lead to better paying jobs and therefore more income and therefore more protective behaviours, etc. So it is a cycle, and I am of the strong belief, and it'll probably be well past my lifetime, okay? But I'm of the strong belief that my daughters, for example, won't experience hardships that, my nan did. It's going to get better over time, but it's going to take time, is what I'm trying to say there. So another population group in Australia that suffers from health inequities are people that live rurally and remotely, okay? Now, a lot of these things is going to overlap with our First Nations people, because as in the first one, you learnt that a lot of First Nations people who do suffer from health inequities do live rurally and remotely, okay? So it's same. So rural and remote populations have greater levels of injury and morbidity, greater numbers for mortality, and most of those are preventable deaths, okay? So a lot of people who live rurally and remotely aren't necessarily dying from Alzheimer's and dementia. They're dying from the other causes which are completely preventable. Why? Why is this the case? Why is there such a big difference between living where we live and living, 4 hours, that way, okay? Well, less access to healthcare, and that is a big one, okay? Yes, where I live, I can go and see 4 or 5 different doctors. There's like, I was going to say 6 or 7. There's about 5 different specialist clinics in my area, and there is a plethora of preventative and like health promoting activities that I can partake in. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, there may be none. There may not even be a doctor or a physio or a gym in your area, and you may have to drive an hour to go and see any one of those 3 things. So I can tell you right now, I love the gym, but if I had to drive an hour every day to go to the gym, I wouldn't go. I would not go at all, all right? I might go once a week on the weekend maybe if I had time, crazy. And a lot of this is driven from the second point. There's less infrastructure, okay, leading to greater risk behaviors, all right? If you have, I look at on the weekend with my daughters, so what are we going to do today, guys? And a lot of the time, we suffer from choice paralysis. We have that many things that we could do with our time that we end up just sitting there going, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do because there's too many things to choose from. Whereas if you live in the middle of nowhere, there may be nothing to do. And if there's nothing to do, then you've got to rely on your creativity, and creativity generally breeds risk behaviors, and then bad things happen. So what can we do about this, all right? Well, we can keep investing and have a greater investment in digital healthcare, like telehealth. Telehealth was one of the best things that came out of COVID-19 because it enabled, so telehealth has been around for a while in a very small amount for people that live rurally and remotely, but it became sort of mainstream in COVID. And now that we're out of COVID, like my doctor in particular, prefers me to go in and see them as getting a telehealth consultation, but there should be greater investment in this. We should be able to telehealth anytime. For me to go and get a doctor's appointment, I've got to wait 6 weeks, and I've got to book a time in well in advance, and then that usually means I need to have a sick day off just to go and see a doctor, even though I'm not sick, because it's in the middle of the day, and that's the only time the doctor works. But if there was a greater investment in telehealth, I could just, call them up at a time that's convenient for me. More portable services. So we do have a fair amount of portable services here in Australia, like breast screening vans, blood donations, etc. But there could be more of them. Greater inland development. So back to that infrastructure point I made up here. So if there were more, so if you go to that town I'm talking about that's 4 hours away, that's got nothing in it, all of a sudden you just have nothing in it, plus a health precinct, okay? Just a building, half the size of Bunnings, call it a health precinct, and in that precinct you have a GP clinic, a cardiovascular specialist, and a gym, and a pool. There you go, 4 things. Those 4 things instantly are going to drastically increase the health levels of people that live in that town, all right? From 4 things, from just a little bit of development, okay? Because it gives them an exercise option, it gives them an exercise option which is aquatic, so, because a lot of people don't go to the gym, but they do like to swim or do aqua aerobics or something like that. It then keeps people from doing risky things because now you can just go swimming on the weekend, which would be fun. And then you've got a doctor to go see if you're starting to feel bad. And then I said a cardiovascular specialist because that's still our number one. Well, if the GP says, I think you've got high blood pressure, you need to see a cardiovascular specialist. Hey, look, there's one next door. Let's go there. All right, there you go. And the other thing which the government does do, but they could do more of it, incentivize professionals to work rurally and remotely. So people that graduate as doctors and et cetera, as long as the infrastructure is there, you then say, okay, we will give you an extra $20,000 per year in your paycheck as a working rurally and remotely, incentivization package. And a lot of people will say no to that, but some people will definitely say yes. Like when I first started teaching, not that it's not really, well, it's a little bit relatable. When you're in your last year of teaching, I don't know if it's different these days, but you used to have this like big page. You used to have to tick all the areas you were happy to work in, or you could pick the very box at the top that said anywhere in the state where there's a job. And that's the one I picked, okay? Because my wife was happy to move anywhere. She could move anywhere with her work pretty easily. And we just needed money to save for a house. So I'm like, yep, I'll go anywhere. And I did. I got sent away. Worked and luckily worked in an absolute beautiful part of the world. And there's still a part of me that wishes I was there, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. I am also very happy here, and life would be very different. Anyway, moving on. Incentivizing professionals to work rurally and remotely. I do want to go through more, but I think that's enough. I think that's enough for this video. So I've covered 2. I'll tell you what, I'll just briefly mention them without giving you a page of thing. So like I said, I'm not going to go through details because we are going to go through groups separately. But other population groups in Australia which suffer greater health inequities include socioeconomically disadvantaged people because they have less income, and then a lot of these things will apply. People living with disabilities because they're often reliant on others to either help them, or they might be wheelchair bound, or for other reasons. Access is a huge issue. And the elderly. Now the elderly is like the natural one because you're like, as you get older, you're going to die. But proportionally, when you look at that sort of like 65 and over category compared to the rest of Australia, of course, a lot of them are going to have a higher mortality rate. But the things that they're dying from, namely, can still largely be prevented. So there are other groups that you can research on your own time if you want, but I will be going through some of them in our series of group videos, which we'll get to next. So that'll end our first video for health in an Australian global context, looking at the health status of Australians. Thanks.